Hello, we just want to welcome you to our webinar on residencies. Thank you so much for being on the call. My name is Santee Beatty, and I direct the Office of Multi-Ethnic Ministries within the Wesleyan Church, within the Church Multiplication and Discipleship Division. And we're so excited that you chose to be a part of this call today. We have a great lineup of leaders, both who are current residents or those who have been residents. We have those who have a macro view of this conversation, and we also have those who are really concerned about this and thinking about how do we make this applicable to our churches at every level, whether they're small, whether they're urban, whether they're rural, whether they're multi-ethnic or ethnic specific. And so we believe that leaders are learners, and at the point we stop learning is at the point we stop leading. And so this conversation is vitally important to bringing to every church the possibility of diversifying staff, of equipping people for ministry, maybe even raising up leaders within their own congregation. And so we're excited that you have come to be a part of the conversation. One of the really important people that has helped us in these webinars has been Josemar Trent. And so she's going to share a little bit with you about how you can jump into the call, how you can ask questions and things of that nature.
As he said, my name is Josemar Trent, and I am part of the CMAT team. I am the translation specialist, and as well I'm the CMAT support staff. And we love Zoom webinars because it gives us the interactive feature at the bottom of your screen. You will have the chat button or also the Q&A. This is an opportunity for you to get involved in by asking questions directly to our speakers or for you to interact with other participants watching in the chat room. Each speaker will introduce themselves first, and then each will take a time to talk a little bit about their journey and their context. We will field a few questions for them specifically, and then after each of them had shared, we will just ask them your questions.
So one of the things we always say with these webinars is this is not a prescription for your church, right? So each church is different, and these individuals who are panelists are not experts by any means in residencies. They're people who have real life experience and they have something to offer, and that's why we invited them to be a part of this conversation. So you may glean from them something that you can use in your context, or something that maybe inspire you, encourage you, or maybe even inform your congregation or your team of how to maybe apply this in your situation. So I'm so excited to introduce to you these amazing leaders. I really want to encourage you to ask questions. I want to encourage you to get involved. Don't be shy. There are ways that you can just find out more information. There are great resources that we have here, so utilize them. So our first person up is going to talk a little bit from a macro level about residencies. And he and we've been talking about this for a while now and trying to create conversation, trying to be creative about how we do this, because for some churches, this comes easily. They have the resources, they have the infrastructure to do it. But for others, it's a little bit more difficult. And some have even considered, like, pass me by. This is not a conversation I need to have. We're too small. We don't have budget. We don't even have a full-time pastor. And so he and I have been talking about this. And so Joel, I want you to talk a little bit about, like, from an education and clergy development standpoint, like, what does this look like? How is this conversation happening across our denomination and maybe even across other denominations? And what can we do to look at this maybe through a new set of eyes and a new lens?
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. For those of you who may be interested, I'm a director in the Education and Clergy Development Division. And basically, what we do is try to work with the various entities within the Wesleyan denomination to help ensure that pastors are well equipped, well trained, and well educated, so that when somebody is sort of ready to be a pastor, there's somebody that is sort of the best out there that we can equip and train. And we've provided the best experiences, whether in the classroom or in a sort of local church mentored experience, that we've provided the best experiences to help them be the best pastor that they can be and that God created them to be. And so that's really what education and clergy development really tries to hone in on. And probably back in 2012 at our quadrennial denominational meeting, Kevin Myers, who's actually a pastor of one of our larger churches, kind of stood up and said what I think a lot of people felt is was basically our educational pathways, our educational institutions were doing a great job educating our pastors, but that churches needed to step up a little bit more and take on the responsibility that they had to provide the local church experience and the types of things that you can really only learn to do in a local church. And so you might be able to learn the theories about performing and presiding over a wedding or a funeral, but you really only learn how to do that in actual practice in a local church, and how to lead a board meeting, how to preach, how to do a Bible study, how to deal with conflict. These are all things that you can learn about in the classroom, but until you actually experience them in the local church context, you're not as well equipped as you could be. And so he really called the denomination to step up and really embrace, or called local churches to step up and really embrace their role in that with intentionality. And so over the next 4 years, we saw a lot of churches begin to develop what we've called residencies, which have basically just been 2-year intense experiences, much more than an internship, where we provide new pastors a safe, developmental, mentored, supervised place to really get that type of experience that that they need in order to be the best equipped pastors. And so we really saw churches step up, and a lot of particularly college students coming out of our universities were able to step into residencies and get some fantastic experiences. Some of what Santis and I have been talking about is how do we ensure that students from a variety of contexts, whether it's rural or urban, whether they're in multi-ethnic contexts, whether they're in small churches or large churches, that people who feel the call to ministry in these variety of contexts can have a great opportunity to really learn the ropes of ministry and really figure that out. And so one of the things that we've really been wrestling with is what does that look like in a variety of contexts. And I'm hopeful that I'm actually looking forward to learn from some of the other panelists, and also hopeful that some of you watching and listening will be the people, or are the people already, that are wrestling with what it looks like in your unique local church setting, which has its own gifts and strengths, what it looks like for you to raise up leaders who are well equipped, the types of leaders that other churches would love to hire or would love to bring in, just because we've been really intentional about providing them just a variety of opportunities and experiences that help develop them. So yeah, just really passionate about seeing people go through their own ministerial preparation journey and be able to look back on it and say, I had a lot of really great mentors, not only great professors and great teachers, but really great mentors, pastors in their lives who gave them opportunities that otherwise they wouldn't have gotten. The type of people who go from being maybe really great volunteers in your church, they go from being maybe a really faithful, good Sunday school teacher, or a great board member, or a great worship leader who might have like a really good gift set, but then feel the call to ministry and through classes, but then also an intentional local church experience, all of a sudden go from maybe a real narrow focus to having the types of gifts, the graces, the experiences that help them do the large breadth of what it takes to be a pastor. You can't just be an awesome Sunday school teacher and then embrace all that it means to counsel and lead and minister and as a pastor in today's world. So that's really what residencies were equipped to do, to help people fulfill their call to ministry and be the best equipped that they can be.
Thank you, Joel. So I'm gonna play the part of someone that like has no clue. Like when you say this word residency, like what does that mean? Like what does that look like? Is this a summer? Is it like a year? Like what are most churches doing when they say residencies? Like how is it packaged, or is there a variety of ways that it's done?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be a variety of ways that it's done just because of the diversity of context and what what your particular local church looks like. But I think what is true of all residencies is they provide a quality opportunity to engage in a variety of experiences in the local church that equip them to be the type of pastor who's ready to just go out and start harvesting the fields that are white for harvest. And so ensuring that it's quality. And so it's an opportunity to engage in deep ministry. You're not just job shadowing, you're actually doing the ministry. A lot of times we'll say that a resident is somebody that can fail. And if they fail, it could have consequences for your ministry because you've given them actual responsibility. It's much more than an internship. Typically an internship is 3 months. You can only learn so much in 3 months. You can learn a lot, but there's something about sort of tenure, being at something over a long period of time that both gives you more opportunities, but also tests your perseverance. Are you the type of person that can really engage over a long period of time? And so those are some of the things that describe what that looks like. It's significant experience. And basically, you want to look at the outcome. Is this person the type of person that I would want to hire that can be one of the best pastors out there? And how have I provided the types of experiences in our residency to help them become that type of person?
Yeah, that's very helpful because I think, sometimes people, may not be sure that if they've never seen it, if they've never done it, just in terms of, the innovative side of it, can it have creative elements? 12 Stone, one of our churches, one of our Wesleyan churches in the Atlanta area, has been kind of at the forefront with Kevin Meyer and leading the way for a lot of our churches and creating opportunities for residents and for connections with churches. But the other reality is there are other churches that are doing this. There are other denominations that are doing this. There's some parachurch organizations that are doing this. And so there's not just one cookie cutter way to do residents. Some do them for a year, some do them for a couple years, and some programs actually are longer than 2 years. They go to about 3. And so we'll be exploring some of that today. You'll hear from people who have been residents. You'll hear from people who've been interns, and you'll also hear from people who are not necessarily what we would consider to be traditional age, which is also one of the big questions that I think we've been getting, right? That is this only for those who just came out of college? Like what's available for a person that this is their second career, right? That at the age of 35 or 40, and they have a family, and now they want to pursue ministry full time. Like what are the opportunities for them? They may not have the theological training, but they need the practical experience, or vice versa. And so that's kind of where we're going over the next several minutes. So tune in. So we're going to start with one of our first panelists, and she has been in this arena for a while, just in the context of an intern and residency program, and now she's full-time in ministry. And so Maggie, why don't you share a little bit of your story first, and then how this has played out for you in your role at your particular church now and churches you've been a part of in the past.
Sure, that'd be great. Well, my name is Maggie. I'm currently in full-time ministry as a youth young adult pastor in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I will have been here 2 years this coming June, and I really love it. I love it here. Like Santisa said, I've been in this arena for a while. Went to Indiana Wesleyan, and had some awesome opportunity to have several long-term internships with some really great people that really set me up for success. I learned a lot of things along the way, and I'm very thankful for it. So I'm glad. Thank you so much, Santis, for asking me to be a part of this. So that's kind of where I am. And I have boiled it down to kind of 5 things that I would love everyone listening to kind of take away. Someone that's been in this arena and, just kind of actually freshly out of it too, finding something full-time and kind of landing there. So I'm going to jump into these 5 things, and I really hope that they're helpful to those that are listening. I think the first one is whenever you have an intern or a resident, just remember that we're learning. That's the biggest thing. Just remember that we're learning and help come alongside us and be patient, but make sure you also have time to come alongside us as well. It is so much easier to learn when you know you have somebody who is walking alongside you in it and that can say like, oh, hey, I've learned along the way, this helps when this situation comes up. It can be a great model for some, I guess, to push us in the deep end. However, there are a lot of people that I graduated with that are no longer in ministry because they were kind of pushed in the deep end and said swim. So that's the number one thing. Walk alongside us, have the time to do that, be patient with us, and just be open with us and the things you've learned along the way. The second thing is set us up for success. We will fail. Everybody fails. We all know that things happen in ministry. We're going to fail. But what does it look like to set up your intern or your resident or someone you're adding to your staff to succeed? Knowing their gifts, their strengths, what areas they need to grow in, maybe some of the things they're not so good at. And I would even say start by having the conversation, like, where would you like to see yourself grow? Having that conversation with an intern or a resident, I can look back and my time at College Wesleyan or any of the other churches, when I was asked, what areas do you think you need to grow in, was immensely helpful. Because a lot of us, I don't think we slow down enough to think that, no, we're not perfect. Especially if we're going to look at some of the younger ones coming right out of ministry, schooling. We think we've got it all figured out, and we don't. So having those hard conversations and just, like, where do you think you need to grow? And building that relationship out of honesty as well. The third thing, I kind of alluded to it, we're going to fail. Please, if you have a resident or an intern, if we fail, I don't make it seem like it's the end of the world. We all know that ministry is kind of like a train going at full speed. And once an event or a program or something starts going, if you jump in front of that train trying to stop it or correct something, there's major damage that's going to be done. So sometimes you just have to let it run its course and let it go, and then having the conversation after with whoever, saying like, how could have we have eliminated some of these things? What could have helped along the way? Where did it go wrong? Because we all know there are things that we can control in ministry, and then there are things we cannot. So having those conversations and realizing that, your resident or your intern is not the reason why something failed. That could be a possibility. It could be something we can't control. So that would be my third thing, is that, when we fail, be willing to have the conversation about where things went wrong and how can we fix that. If it's something we can control, if we do it again, where do we go from there? For the last two are kind of personal. Is share life with us. Especially if your resident or your interns are single, or if they're away from family, if they've moved to your area and they're away from family, please do life with us. There is nothing more frightening and nothing to make you question your call, like not feeling like you have anybody in your court or anybody to do life with. So when you have an intern or you have a resident, do life with them outside of the office, because that's not what life is. 24/7 isn't in the office. Inviting them over for dinner, having fun with them, showing the ropes of the community that they're new to, making that time. That's a super personal one that I'm sharing with all of you that would be super helpful. I've learned along the way that not everyone does that well, but I look back at the times that I've had long-term internships and they did it well, and I'm incredibly grateful that they did. I think the last one I want to leave you with is be open to having an intern or a resident that might not fit what you had in mind. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is really speaking as a woman. I don't know how many times I applied for residencies or internships, and the conclusion I came to is I was turned down because I was a female, or that I wasn't married. So just be mindful that, God is totally capable of using someone outside of the box. Don't put yourself in such a small box that you miss out on what God has for you. and for your team and for your church and for your community. So those are the things that I have to share, and those are kind of the 5 big things that if I look back on my time in internships and residencies, those are the big things that I took away.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Very, very helpful. So next up, we have Colby. Colby has a different approach to this. He's one of those individuals that I mentioned earlier that is not your traditional age of a resident. He's someone who this is something that he felt called to do after college and working for a season. So Colby, why don't you talk a little bit about your story and how residency came into your view in terms of your calling to pastor and to lead in the church?
So I was, Santis kind of made it sound like I'm really old, but as you can see, I'm young and handsome, still in my prime. But I'm 33, and I came into the residency, first introduced at 30 and then entered at 31. And so I had been serving in another church, another denomination, as an assistant pastor of a church plant. And I served there for about 7 years before transitioning over to my current church at Heartland here in the Fishers/Indianapolis area. And so it was a big endeavor for me to go from something that was very familiar. I'd gone through the process in the Methodist Church of becoming a licentiate and then going through their process for approving ministers, or the ordination track. And then coming to Heartland, I was kind of like, I don't know how, there is no transfer process. So my credentials, I wasn't sure how they transferred over. And so the issue I had was, one of the issues that I ran into was, how do I get started now, or how do I start over in ministry, going from one church to another, or one denomination to another? And the first Sunday that my wife and I committed to attending Heartland Church and becoming members, they announced from the stage that they were starting this residency program. And that was kind of my inroads to continue working in ministry. What it looks like here at Heartland. Heartland is a larger church and multi-ethnic, contemporary, non-denominational, or actually interdenominational church. So you've got a lot of different ways to look at diversity here at Heartland. And so throughout my residency track, I came in as a campus coordinator. We were looking to launch new locations, and so I was kind of doing the research and setting the groundwork for a new location. Then I transitioned into a role as communications director, and which was outside of my wheelhouse, which I'll say, as a resident, I think you need to be challenged and thrown into some areas that aren't necessarily, you have a tool in the toolbox, but then you discover or grow into that. And then thirdly, my final transition, as I was leaving or finishing up the 2-year residency, I was then named campus pastor of what we would call the main location here at the church. And so it was an interesting journey. But I'll say this: I came in having previously been a church planter and thinking about doing it again. And so the residency was a great way to assess my readiness for being a church planter and doing that again, because there really wasn't that sort of assessment. Or just think about this for context. It had been 25 years in my previous denomination since they had launched a church in my region. And so there was no church planting assessment. It was, you are called by God, go do it. No money, no training, no, the Lord bless you and hopefully keep you. So this was a great opportunity to be assessed in that. And then a great way for you to be trained and mentored alongside of some leaders that have done this before, that give you the grace to make the mistakes, as Maggie said, and provide an environment that it's okay to ask questions, and it's even okay to fail. It's not okay to not bring up issues that you run into. It's not okay to quarantine yourself and make the residency a proving ground for yourself, because that serves more your ego than it does the church. And then I think the final thing I'll mention is it's a great place for you to learn self-leadership. It's one thing to build a team and to equip a team and learn how to lead from the front. It's another thing to have yourself be under great self-leadership and growing and spiritually maturing. And that was something that I really appreciated from my mentors and leaders, is pouring into me spiritually and making sure I'm taking care of myself, making sure I'm taking care of my home, because I was married and had 3 kids when I entered into the residency. So overall, it's just been a great experience for me, and one that I would strongly recommend, not just for folks coming fresh out of college, but people that are making that transition from one industry to into ministry.
Great. Thank you so much, Kobe. And you are handsome and young. It's a joy to have you, man. So a couple questions have already come up that I'm going to try to address at some level, and then we'll probably come back to these, because these are questions we may need to deal with a little bit more a little bit later. One question was, do you have to be certified within the Wesleyan Church or have some type of certification to have a resident or residency program? The answer to that is no. However, there are models out there, and so sometimes it's good to check out what others have done so that you're not reinventing the wheel. And then you can utilize some of the things that you see in those models, or you can partner with those models if that's appropriate. The second thing was just in terms of compensation. What tends to happen for most residencies is about a 20 to 30 hour a week commitment. It is part-time in the context that the person that's a resident typically has some other form of employment, but they're given to the church about 20 to 30 hours a week. And typically that's done in terms of payment, it's done through a stipend that the church arranges or creates. And there's typically housing that is provided. And what that usually means is the church finds someone within the community of the church, or maybe there's someone that has a rental home that they're willing to allow the church to use for that resident. But the church usually arranges or sets up a relationship where that person has housing, because housing is a huge part of course, monthly bills and things that people have to take care of. So the church usually takes care of the stipend and usually takes care of housing or helps to arrange it somehow. Some churches have parsonages, and they may use that as the place for the resident to stay. That's typically when it's the person is single. When the person is married with kids, sometimes churches decide to do other things, and so that always lands with the discretion of the church and the partnership or whatever the decision is made with that particular resident or residents. So let's go to the next panelist. We're really excited to have Brianna. Brianna, why don't you share a little bit of your story and a little bit of what's happening with you at Kentwood Community Church?
Yeah. Well, hello. My name is Brianna Bailey, and just a little bit about myself. I am from Olympia, Washington State, and God used Grace Bible College to bring me here to Michigan, and I graduated from there in April of last year with my degree in music and emphasis in worship. But after, I guess just to go back a little more, after my freshman year there, Brant Porter, the worship pastor at Kentwood Community Church, approached me via Facebook Messenger, super random, and said that he had saw me lead worship somewhere and saw potential in me and wanted to invest in me, and which was just a huge blessing and something that I really wasn't expecting. So I started to attend KCC. After that, I attended there for 2 years just as a volunteer in their worship program. And then my senior year in college, I started an internship with them, which was great. And now, since September of 2016, I have been a resident there, their worship resident pastor. And it's really been amazing. Even though it's only been 5 months since I've been doing this, I feel like I have learned and grown a lot. A lot of what everyone else has been saying is really resonating with my story as well. I really liked how Joel pointed out in the beginning that this residency is really just a time to get your hands in a little bit of everything, to get actual practice in a safe environment. And I have found that after getting my degree in this, being able to go out and actually apply what I have learned has been really helpful. And then being able to know that if I do fail, or when I do fail, that I have a safety net underneath me. I'm able to process it with a few of the members there at the church, and to really talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and learn more about myself in that way. Before I got started, Brant Porter sat me down and he talked to me about personalizing my residency and just asked about my strengths and my weaknesses. And so far, we've been really focusing on a few of my weaknesses, and of course, with my strengths, trying to figure out what more I can do. So I guess I'd say one of the weaknesses is leading on the piano. I play the piano and I love the piano, but it's something that I really grew away from when it came to leading on the worship platform. And so he has been challenging me to play a lot more and lead in that way, just because it's really helpful when going to different churches, and I guess helpful for a worship leader to be able to lead vocally and instrumentally. And yeah, so that's just one example. And I'm really just getting my hands in all the different areas in the worship ministry to prepare me in any situation that might come up in the future, if I take on a position as a worship leader, worship pastor. So I'm learning more how to lead up front, to really encourage the congregation and lead them through worship. I'm learning more about the sound and the technology around leading worship, the producing that is involved in organizing a service and putting a service together, and also just growing more as a leader. I have found really helpful just attending different meetings and watching how the church approaches different challenges, different things that come up, and how to really, I guess, answer those hard questions in a correct way. And then to also just shepherd and encourage the volunteers that we have in our worship ministry, by having one-on-ones or sending little encouragement letters, just being there and learning to be more of a leader in that way. And yeah, so I said that kind of just wraps it up. One thing that I've just really enjoyed, like I said before, is just having the opportunity to be able to pinpoint my strengths and weaknesses and know that I'm just in a safe place and able to fail and to strive and do well.
Very good. Thank you, Brianna. Like, the last two churches I've been a part of, we've had residents, and one of the things that you highlight that I think is so powerful is, and I said to one of the residents in our last church, like, you have an opportunity to really do something I didn't have a chance to do as a full-time or as a bivocational pastor. Like, you get a chance to really see ministry and put your hands in a lot of different places,
Mm-hmm.
and sense where are you really called, and where do you feel like your gifting or your skill set works best. And in that space of failure, there are enough people around you and enough things set up around you where you probably won't get fired if you fail, but when you're in other contexts, it's probably, something you have more of a chance of maybe being removed if you blow things up. But in a residency, you're expected to do that, right? Like you're expected to learn, you're expected to grow. It doesn't mean you do anything outlandish, and you still can be removed. Volunteers can be removed, but there's such a level of grace, and it's expected. And as I think about my own journey, you look at whether you come in with the education, the theological training, but you don't have any experience, or you come in with experience, but you don't have any theological training. And I think what the residency does, which is really powerful, is it has a way of trying to pull those two worlds together and give you real life experience at a church on the ground. So thank you for sharing that, Brianna. I'm going to go to Paige now. Paige, you are at a church, and you've been serving for a while. Why don't you tell us a little bit of your story and the context of ministry that you're in?
My name is Paige Vanderhoff, and I am a resident at Grace Bible Church in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I've been a resident since June 2016, so about 8 months or so. And I'm originally from Ohio, but my husband was in the Navy, and so just plugging into Grace and, wanting to move. I'm sorry, we moved to Virginia, sorry about that. But just plugging into Grace, I wanted to be able to volunteer, but instead of volunteering, I actually got introduced to the residency program. And just graduating college, and I have an associate's in children's ministry and in Christian studies. So I was like, yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to get training and, what I graduated from. And so here I am. So my current position that I'm training for is to be a family ministry director, which is birth through 8th grade. And what that entitles is a lot of things that I'm getting training for. So luckily it's a 2-year program, which is awesome. And so whenever they asked me what I wanted to do, I was like, I'm not sure, because I'm new to Grace and the family ministry. And so just teach me everything. And they took it literally. So I'm just, right now, I am in training for 3 different areas in the family ministry. And as my time continues, those areas will grow. So one of them is I am the Sunshine Island production coordinator. So in family ministry, we have 3 different areas of Sunshine Island, which is our infant through 4-year-olds. And then we have Treasure Cove, which is our elementary school. And then we have Amped, which is our 6th through 8th grade. So with Sunshine Island and being the production coordinator, what that means for me is that I help to lead worship, and I help to prepare the storytellers on how to tell the stories that week. But I also get the wonderful experience and chance to just pour into a group of middle schoolers and train them to lead worship for the preschoolers or for the 2- and 3-year-olds. And just being able to pour into them is such a blessing to me. And it's a strength area, and it helps me to grow because I love little ones. Little ones are my favorite. So being able to grow in the area of middle schoolers and getting comfortable with them is a great opportunity. So what that looks like is I learn the videos, and then I learn the story, and I find a volunteer that is wanting to do the story, and we teach them that. And on Wednesday nights, we have rehearsals to where we learn all the songs and do things in that area. So it's awesome. And then on Sunday, we all join together and just serve and lead and worship. My next area is I am learning to do administrative things. Sorry, that's not the right word. I'm not even going to try it again. But so what I do is I take all the volunteer applications right now, and I'm just uploading them to my computer and then uploading them to our database. So that way I'm learning how to do things in that area too, because being a director, you need to be plugged into all things. Another thing that I am training in is the operations. So what that is I take all the curriculum from birth through 8th grade, so Sunshine Island and Treasure Cove is an Amped, and I take all the things that they'll need for that week on that Sunday, and I gather it, put it all together, and then I go and transfer it to each room for them. So it's great because my My focus is Sunshine Island right now since it is the production piece, but it's great to be able to plug into Treasure Cove and Amped and see the things that they're doing also. So I get the opportunity to be in every little piece of family ministry. And our family ministry is different. I'm not sure, if the Orange curriculum is something that's part of 12 Stone or if it's part of just different churches. But it's awesome, and it's not your typical Sunday school. So it's a great opportunity for that. I would say what this residency program has really helped me grow in is my spirituality. Of course, I walked with God, beforehand, but being put in a leadership position really hold you accountable to your relationship with God. And just like I have this chance to pour into not only just, preschoolers and middle schoolers, but also the volunteers. And so I need to make sure that my walk with God is right and that I'm listening and just receiving what He has for me. And I would say so far that is my favorite part. Of course, being in leadership is awesome, but just being able to be like, wow, God, like, show me how I can further your kingdom. Show me how I can build up your people. Show me how I can just pour your love into these volunteers and just learn more about them and learn more about you through them. So that is just something that I'm loving, and that I really look forward to. Another thing is the mentorship that I get. I do have 2 mentors. I have one for the ministry and one for my personal development. And I have loved every minute of that because I know that if I do fail or if I do have questions, they're right there beside me and I can just text them up and they're right there. I also love the part of being on staff. I actually get to be on staff with my other residents and just everybody. So that means I'm a part of all the meetings. I'm part of everything that staff does, and it creates such a community, which is great because I don't feel alone, especially for those people that have traveled from other states. You're part of a community, and it's an awesome feeling to be a part of that and to learn what it's going to be like in the future. And also the trainings that we do on Wednesdays, those have really helped to develop my leadership skills also and just see the areas that I need to grow in, and it helps me to realize this is where you're at right now, but this is where you're going to be and how to be able to be successful in that part. So, yeah.
Thank you, Paige. A great opportunity to hear some of those practical things. I do want to emphasize something you mentioned that I don't think we've mentioned before. Most residencies have some type of weekly, it's usually once a week, but it's a time to pour into residents for an hour. Some do it for an hour, some do it for an hour and a half, some do it for a little bit longer. But typically part of the responsibility of the church is to give that, not just a hands-on training, but to give some practical training through some type of workshop format, leadership development format, a mentoring format. And so that's a vital part of the process. And what I would also say, most churches actually do residencies with more than one resident. You don't have to do it that way. But there's something about more than one person going through the process and them being able to have a shared experience. You get to see the complexities of it being with more than one person. And so as you consider a resident, I would encourage you to consider more than one if you're able to. Not everyone is able to, but you have to get started somewhere. But that leadership piece once a week, and then the opportunity to rub shoulders with other residents who are actually doing ministry in other areas, typically, gives you just a different insight. And it's kind of like iron sharpening iron as they work together. So, Joel, you're up next, man. Tell us a little bit about your ministry context at Central Wesleyan in Holland, and kind of a little bit of your story.
Hey guys, so like Santee says, my name is Joel. I'm originally out of Puerto Rico, so I was born in Puerto Rico, lived there for the first 10 years of my life, and then moved to Florida, where I had lived up until 2016. So I was born into the church, and I was born into more of the Spanish church side of things, more of the Pentecostal side of things. So it wasn't up until, I want to say, the age of 19 that as I was going through the motions, God had been reaching out to me since birth. I knew since birth that I had been called to something higher. it being worship. I've always been drawn to music, so I knew it had something to do with music. But like it was like I've just talked to people about. I was focused more on the financial side of things. How am I going to be able to just live my life financially and just focus on that? But it wasn't up until the age of 19 that God really got a hold of my heart. And I had been struggling through what I wanted to do in college. And at age 19 was really when I kind of laid everything down and accepted the call that God had in my life. And from that point forward, God has opened so many doors for me. I am now at Central Wesleyan in Holland, Michigan. Before that, I was in Clearwater, Florida, serving at another church, and I had been there for about 3 years. Prior to that, I had been just helping out and leading worship and more of the, like I said, Pentecostal Spanish church side of things. So when I just look back at it, God has really taken a hold of my life and taken me where He's wanted me, and I've just followed through that. So my role, that's just kind of a little bit of my story, how I ended up here, just kind of accepting the call of God and just being open to where He wants me to go. It hasn't been easy, but I think I've just tried to do my best to be faithful to His calling. So right now, my role here at Central Wesleyan is I'm the next gen worship leader. So I lead out middle school, high school, and young adult worship. And I've been here for about 7 weeks now. So I'm a Puerto Rican Floridian that moved to the cold. It's crazy. I don't get it, but God gets it. So it's all right. I'm learning the art of layering and wearing the right clothes, but I'm enjoying every bit of it. I think you make the best of whatever season you're placed in. And I think it's your outlook that allows God to move in that way. So I've just done my best to stay faithful and just stay positive. So like I said, I'm the next gen worship leader, and my role here, what it looks like is I'll meet with my teams throughout the week for rehearsals and planning, and we'll plan out our services. We'll talk through ideas, through vision, and through song set list, and we'll just kind of plan that out. The cool thing also about me is I'm also able to be a part of the Sunday, I guess the big church worship side of things. So I'm able to be a part of their debrief meetings, their planning meetings. And I think something that Paige said, which I think is very important, is I just like that I'm able to be a part of another team. That way I don't feel alone, because having moved up from Florida, I moved up by myself. All my family's in Florida, and most of my family is back in Puerto Rico. So I'm basically alone here. Thankfully, God worked it out in a way where I had some friends that were a part of this church already. So that made it a little bit easier, but it can definitely get tough. So I think it's important to be a part of other areas in the church. That way you also feel included, you feel valued, and that I have felt here. So I'm thankful for that. And my goal, my role here, meet with them, and I'll send out the planning center invites, do all of the scheduling stuff, and also look for any other possible students or just people that are wanting to volunteer to be a part of the music and worship side of things, maybe even the tech side of things as far as screens, sound, lights, you name it. So this is sort of similar to my previous position back home. The only thing is I think I'm held to a higher standard here, but it's not a standard that that makes me feel like I'm going to fail, or that makes me feel like I have to do this. Thankfully, I have a great team here that has my back and is here for whatever that I need. And I think a very important thing is do not exclude yourself. Try to even include yourself in certain places, in certain meetings, in the times that maybe you feel alone. Do I have a goal here? I do have a goal. My goal here as a Spanish guy coming in at a Wesleyan church that I've never been a part of, my goal here is to help and shape a culture of worship that is multicultural. And what I mean by that is even the songs that we pick, even the people that I maybe even audition, even the style of music that we play. In a lot of places, I try to be intentional in the sense because if we're trying to change a culture, there needs to be something that needs to change. And sometimes that's hard, sometimes it's easy, but it's just basically having that vision and doing that. So even speaking about vision as I'm closing out, I just kind of wrote a few keys that I want to leave you guys with. And this is for all of us as residents, and even people that are maybe even interested in being a resident, or those that are interested in having residents. So one of the key things is prepare. Man, prepare is very important. Be prepared. Do not come unprepared. Also, stay ahead of the game. That goes hand in hand with preparation. I try to do my set list at least 2 weeks in advance. That way it gives everyone a chance to be updated and do their practice. Don't expect so much from yourself. And what I mean by that is don't set your goals so high that you yourself begin to let yourself down. So just even like Maggie said, just try to not think of it as this being so serious. Try to allow yourself to fail. That's how you learn. So one last thing is something that I had heard from a pastor. Trust the vision of your church. Very, very important. Do not come in with a vision and try to fit it into the church's vision. It's not going to work. So do your best to humble yourself and trust the vision. I mean, I came from a pretty different background, so just being involved in the vision is going to allow you to work alongside of everyone.
Very good. Thank you, Joel. I think you raised some really important points for us to think about. And one of those is just the whole concept of relationships, right? And the relationships piece, I think, is huge. But also, I think there are a lot of churches, as I get calls about this and messages, Facebook, whatever, there are a lot of churches that are trying to figure out how to diversify their staff. And this may be one of those places where they can do that. They may not be able to hire a full-time person. They may not be able to, they may not even have that within their sphere of influence, but the residency program may be a place to tap into the diversification of their staff. And so, man, thank you for bringing that up. So our next panelist, David, why don't you just share a little bit of your story? Now, you have Wesleyan roots, but you're not a part of a Wesleyan church right now, and I think that's really good in the context of this conversation, just to see the complexity of how residencies are happening, not just within our denomination, but outside of it. So why don't you share a little bit of your story and a little bit of your ministry context right now?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is David Telfort. As Santis mentioned, I grew up in a Wesleyan church in Brooklyn, New York, born and raised at Pilgrim Wesleyan. And after graduating from college, I went to Occidental College, made my way back east. And after graduating from Divinity School, I had an awesome opportunity to join a residency program at Plymouth United Church of Christ. Part of that denomination, United Church of Christ. And it is part of a transition into ministry program that was founded and is funded by the Lilly Endowment, one of the largest philanthropic givers for theological endeavors in the country, located in Indiana. And I joined the staff of Plymouth in Des Moines, Iowa in the summer of 2015. And, really didn't know what to expect. I knew that the residency program was designed for recently graduating seminarians to have an opportunity to work with an experienced staff at a thriving church, as Santis and Joel said earlier, giving us an opportunity to kind of launch off and be able to do what God is calling us to do pretty effectively, but really didn't know what I was walking into. And I think for me, there were there are kind of three things that kind of stand out to me about my experience there. The first is the incredible learning that we're able to get as residents. In my program, it's a 27-month commitment. Because of the size of the church, it is a full-time position, and there are two of us at a time. We come in on a staggered model, so there's always one resident that has been there for about a year. And the way that the residency is structured, we are treated as full staff. We are two of the generalists on staff. There are some associates that have particular fields of expertise. But in addition to our normal duties of worship and pastoral care, we also have some classes that we take outside in the community, whether it be pastoral care at a counseling center or a clergy group that we're a part of. So there's quite a bit of learning that happens inside and outside of the walls of the church. The next piece that's really important, as has been mentioned by many of our panelists, is reflection. So there are times of reflection built into our experience. Once a week, each of the residents, we have an hour with the senior minister where we talk about anything that may be on our minds, any questions that have come up during the week, programs that we're leading, things like that. We also have an opportunity to meet with the committee that brought us. One thing that's unique about my residency program is that there is a committee of parishioners that really take over the application process, and they bring us in. And that same committee stays with us throughout our 27 months. And we meet with them every month for coffee to talk about our experience. So there are moments of reflection built into our time there, whether it be time with the senior minister, with that committee that I just mentioned, and some other things that are also available to us as well. And then the last piece that's also really important about my experience is not only do we have an opportunity to learn, not only do we have an opportunity to reflect, but we also have an opportunity to launch gracefully. One of the gifts of my program is that really once we turn into our second year, pretty much half of our job description is to begin looking for our next opportunity with the support of the church. It's a really, really great gift as we're making our way through that second year, continuing to learn, continuing to have kind of responsibilities given to us and added to our portfolio. We're also trusted to be able to also manage our transition. And it's a transition that is handled very carefully. The program has been in existence for about 10 years now. So there's a healthy rhythm to residents coming in and exiting the system. And it's been a gift to now be in my second year, kind of going through what I saw my predecessor going through last year. So it's been a tremendous gift, and I look forward to answering any questions that may come later.
Thank you, David. Very, very, very good. Really appreciate your perspective and just revealing to us that residencies are very vast in the context of denominations and just roles. Most of the people who've been on so far, except for maybe Colby, have had specific areas, but you've been more of a generalist and associate pastor type of atmosphere, and that's a really important part to include. Now, before we go to kind of group questions, our last panelist brings kind of a perspective that is unique and I think is really important in this context. Emily, why don't you talk a little bit about what it's like as a staff member of a church who kind of supervises or oversees a residency program? Because a lot of the questions we've gotten so far have been about the logistics of how to do this. Like, how do you do it? How do you do it? And we'll get to this too. How do you do it at a small church? Like, how do you create this? And that's not really where I want you to focus, but just how do you manage this? How do you start it? How do you equip? How do you prepare your church for it? And then what do you do to sustain it in a very healthy way? So, Emily, why don't you share a little bit of your story and what you guys are doing at College Wesleyan?
Thanks, Santis. Yeah, we have been doing a residency program here at College Wesleyan for the last 8 years. I've worked with that program for the last about 6 years. And I would say what you're pointing out is so important because oftentimes we get on the bandwagon with something that's going well other places, but we don't take the time to make sure that our congregations are on board, that they are excited and that they've caught the vision for the potential of what a residency program could do, not only for the future of our local church, but for the church at large. So I think that's a huge place to start. Secondly, I would say that in terms of prepping people to be supervisors, this is an investment that can't be understated in preparing your church for a residency program. I think very often it's easy for us to see residencies as cheap labor, people who are coming out of school, who want a job, who want to work maybe in a church that has people who, you know, they'd like to rub shoulders with. But the reality is that supervision is the key to a good residency. And so really, in order to provide a resident with what they need, you have to have someone who's committed to be a teacher. I think of it a lot of times as if you were going to start a school and you recruited 10 students for your school and you got them all gathered together in the classroom, but you had no teacher. It's not much of a school at that point. So the role of the supervisor really is the one who is responsible to equip and to evaluate and to give feedback and coaching. And so preparing whoever it is, whether that's yourself, if you're a solo pastor, or whether it's members of your congregation who are going to step in from a lay perspective and offer supervision and coaching, or whether you're in a multi-staff situation and you're going to appoint the worship pastor to have a worship residency or the youth pastor to have a youth resident. It's super important that you have taken the time to help them understand the role of the supervisor in that setting. I would just say such great information that's been passed along today, and I'm sure more will come out of the questions. Another thing, though, that we have definitely learned is the value of allowing the resident to not only do some observation, some shadowing of you as the supervisor. That can be really important, but also letting them co-lead some things, letting them take responsibility alongside you in some of the ventures that you give them, and then making sure that they have something, as Joel said at the very beginning, something that is truly theirs to lead from the beginning to the end, that they get to either celebrate their victory in it, or they get to feel a little bit of the sting if it doesn't go so well. That's a very important piece, and it takes a special person as a supervisor to allow someone to succeed and fail both. So I think the most successful residencies we've seen are those that we're allowing these people to have all three of those opportunities. To that end, I also think that it's really important for churches to recognize that they are taking this person on for the sake of sending them out. So oftentimes, and a lot of churches do this, we've done this with a few of our residents. It just so happened that about the time they were going to graduate from the residency program, a staff position opened up, a need opened up, and they applied for it and were the best candidate. But by and large, our mindset is, how do we share these people that we've gotten to spend a couple of years with the greater church? And that's really our goal, is how do we help them find where God has for them after they're done with the program here. Our program is 2 years long, but no matter how long your program is, that you're seeking their next steps. And on the flip side of that, for the health of your congregation, that no matter what you've had the resident invested in, that there's a handoff plan for their ministry. So it may be that you have a children's ministry resident pastor for 2 years. But when they're done, the plan is not to necessarily hire another children's resident. We don't want to become dependent on any residency, because then we have a problem. Then it's not really a residency, it's cheap labor. And so one of our built-in things that we work with all of our supervisors to make sure that they have with the residents is that there's a transition plan for the church, that we know that the resident has spent quality time saying, how will I hand this ministry that I've been in charge of off, whether that be to the supervisor or whether that be to laity within our congregation. But that has been a huge point for the health of our church in housing residents.
Wow, great stuff, Emily. I think you capture just a lot of the questions that are getting asked, like, how do we do this? Like, one question that came in is, man, like, how do you deal with the legality of stipends, right? Some of the practical stuff. And so, you'll have to, find out what are the laws and the things related to your state, because they vary. But a good place to start is within your district. And there may be churches that are within your district who've already done it, or the people who help manage the finances of your district can kind of help you in that regard. Another great question that came in is like, how do you do this if you're a staff of under 200 or you're a staff of under 100? And I just want to say, and I'm gonna invite Joel to chime in, because he answered this really well in the Q&A piece. You know, I'm helping a church out right now. There's a church of under 200, and the first thing that we're doing is creating kind of vision casting for it, but also creating something in writing that the board and leaders can go back and read, and then giving them access to websites so they can see like how this is being done in other churches. But then we have to decide like what that looks like for us financially. It has to start, getting into the budget. And so this is a great time. Like if you're looking for, bringing on a resident in the fall, like this is the time to really begin to do a lot of the hard work of preparing your church and your leaders for it. And then beginning to decide like what roles do you want them to do. And then this is a good time to start vetting and looking at candidates for the residency, because they're going to have to start making decisions about where they're going to be over the summer or where they're going to be in the fall. And so those are big questions that churches that are under 200 need to start asking themselves if this is something that is starting to pique your interest. But you answered the question, Joel, really well on the Q&A about small churches. And I want you to share a little bit of what you shared in that context.
All right, I'll try to do that. One thing that's been helpful in conversations that I've had is, particularly for small churches or just any church in general, is to think of the different types of people that might want to do residencies. I think because of the success of models like College Church and 12 Stone, we often think of residencies as serving your sort of classic 22-year-old college graduate that you have to recruit and bring on board and find a place for housing and figure out the compensation package. But one thing I'll mention real quick is, at least in the Wesleyan denomination, 70% of our ministerial students aren't actually that classic 22-year-old college graduate. They're all different types of people. So imagine that you have in your small rural church a 45-year-old school teacher who feels a call to ministry, and they're married, they have a full-time job, and they have kids, and they're embedded in the community, and they're not looking to uproot and go to Emily's awesome program. They want to serve right there in that church. And so they don't need a house. They don't need an income. They might be a dual income family, and they're perfectly fine. What they need is an opportunity, right? They need to move from being somebody who's just an awesome, Sunday school teacher or worship leader to somebody who can get the breadth of experience that you want to give a person to become a full-on pastor. And so there, it's interesting because your program is the key aspect that you need to figure out. What does it look like for somebody who has a full-time job to begin to get those experiences? Now, that's going to be a very unique residency. Like, that might be a 5-year residency because they only have 10 hours a week, and you can only fit so much in. And so I say that to sort of maybe open the door and the imagination of what it might look like in a small church or a rural church. It may not be you going out and recruiting a 22-year-old college graduate and having a 30-hour-a-week program and a compensation package and housing for them. And actually, most ministerial students are not that. And so don't forget the people in your church that God may be calling to ministry and for whom a residency may look totally different than college church is. And Emily even mentioned, I think somewhere in there, that she actually can't provide an experience of what it's like to be a pastor in a church of 78. It's impossible for her to do that. And the person best equipped to figure out what a residency looks like in a church of 78 is the pastor and the leaders at that church. And that just takes work to sort of explore, what does that look like? If we want to recruit a 22-year-old college student, how are we going to do that? How are we going to make that appealing? In terms of like compensation, it's a matter of what will it take to get them here? Probably involves some of those things like housing and, stipend to pay for gas and food and car insurance and things like that. but I guess maybe my answer is a little bit of a non-answer because it's so unique to each context. The goal, ultimately, the outcome is to provide people with a great experience where they can become an awesome pastor. But what that looks from place to place, what that looks like in a Hispanic congregation versus a Haitian congregation or a rural white congregation can be broadly different. So does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful. And you bring up something, because let me just be transparent. Like when I first started thinking about this webinar, part of me was a little bit selfish in that I wanted to title it multi-ethnic residencies. And part of the struggle was I was hearing from so many multi-ethnic churches that were small, or ethnic churches that were in urban areas, or churches that really had never done it before, and they were trying to figure out how to do it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that would have narrowed the pool. And if we're going to talk about residents, we need to talk about them much broader, because a lot of our rural white churches are dealing with the same problem. But something that you said really stuck out to me, and how you answered the question via text, is that oftentimes a residency in a smaller church may look more like a mentoring model. For example, when I started in ministry in the Baptist church, it was called being an armor bearer, right? And so basically, what I did, I'm dating myself by saying this. I see a couple smiles from some of the panelists that y'all know what I'm talking about. But basically, what I did is I hung around the pastor, and I learned from them. I learned from a planter. I learned from a seasoned pastor. And that was kind of the model that I learned. That was my residency, if you will. I didn't call it that. But I say all that to say this. I'm not saying go out and build armor bearer programs. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the model may be more of a mentoring model. It may be more of a model of pouring into someone indirectly and informally. And so some smaller churches, that may be the best approach, rather than building what we've been talking about. And then the other thing that I would say, as I'm working with a couple smaller churches right now to figure this out, is it may be an idea to talk with other churches in your area, particularly if there are other Wesleyan churches that want to have residents, and trying to do something together. Maybe there's an opportunity for more than one church, two churches, or maybe a district and a church to figure out a way that you could have a resident or an intern to start out together until you're able to really do it alone. I think one of the challenges is always the resources, it's always the timing, and it's how are we going to supervise this person well, which is what I think Emily hit it out of the park with. Like, the supervision is huge. And so if you can figure out a way to share that responsibility, and allow them to see different things, and then yet give them the kind of supervision, the coaching that is needed, I think most people will come away, and you as a church will come away better, because you made that investment. So I'm going to throw out a couple questions to the larger group. We have about 15 minutes or so left, but there are a couple questions that really came out that I think it'd be great to hear from some of you. So when you think about think about a church that is about to get this started, right? They've never done it before. They're just starting to, maybe this webinar is the first thing. Like, man, I didn't even know this was possible. As you think about what they would need to do to reach somebody like you, like before you came on to be a resident where you are, like, what are some of the things that you would say to them that would be some good steps to find good quality residents in their area or for their church? So anybody can jump in.
Well, one thing that I would say, there are two things that I think that are important. The first is I would definitely suggest trying to find some leaders and some laity in your local congregation, in your parish, that have kind of a shared vision or shared passion for mentoring the next generation of leaders, to serve the wider church. I think that one of the things that appealed to me as someone looking for a residency was that there was going to be a group of folks that were committed to nurturing me. So in addition to my colleagues, I was also going to have parishioners that were going to be looking out for me, asking me how I'm doing, and willing to be that community away from home. And I think that that's something that should definitely be looked for. Who are some other people in the congregation? Who are some other leaders that can help me as pastor, as whoever I may be in the congregation, to make this happen? In terms of reaching out to actual potential residents, I think that there are incredibly rich resources in our denominational seminaries, as well as kind of larger divinity schools that may be in your area as well. There are always, hungry seminarians that are looking for an opportunity and really looking for someone to pour into them. At the school that I went to, there was someone that was actually focused on getting people, positions once they graduated. So looking for some kind of job placement counselor or something like that may be one route if you are looking at the seminary or divinity school level.
Thanks, David. Any others? How would you answer that question of how do you get started?
I would definitely say actually something that Joel said earlier, which is to look at your own congregation first. I did not seek out a residency. I happened upon a residency, and now I'm a campus pastor. So that wasn't my plan. And there are going to be people in your church that maybe they didn't fathom the possibilities, but because the church thought through a track for people that had an interest in ministry or felt a calling or just a desire to want to do more and get involved more, people can rise up to the calling. Secondly, I would not just consider seminarians, folks that are in divinity school. Reach out to your local community college, your local universities and colleges that are in your area, and you'd be surprised of the folks that have good theological training, or just folks that have come up in churches, in local churches, but are looking elsewhere that haven't considered ministry as an opportunity. And so kind of cast your net kind of wide and broad and see what kind of fish you bring in.
Yeah, I would add to that just the whole concept of when you think of broad. I think one of the challenges we have within the Wesleyan denomination is, unfortunately, our Wesleyan universities are not very diverse. And so sometimes when churches are looking for the diversity, it's very difficult for them to find it at our Wesleyan colleges and universities. Our seminary is a little bit more diverse than our universities. And so you may have to look outside, and you may have to pursue other colleges. You may have to pursue some HBCUs. You may have to pursue some colleges that have a larger population of Hispanic leaders. And for the churches, particularly that are small, I don't underestimate the possibility that you may find someone that has the education and the training in one area. Like, say, for instance, they are trained to be a nurse, but they still have a passion for ministry, and they may still continue being a nurse, but yet and still pursue ministry at your church. And so that bivocational piece, which is in large part what happens to a lot of our urban churches, our churches that are small, and even our rural churches, people have to have other jobs. And so finding people who are passionate about ministry, but yet and still they have a place in the public square and are willing to be bivocational, is also a really important part of the vetting process. You may need to look more broadly. I was dealing with a church recently, and they were specifically looking for diversity because the location where they were was predominantly African American. And I said to them, "Have you talked to your universities? Have you gone to sororities and fraternities, and have you talked to leaders of those organizations? Because they may be able to give you some names of people that you could tap on the shoulder and say, man, you live in this area, you're passionate about ministry, would you consider being a part of what we're doing? And then the last thing I'll say is this, just like we often look to larger churches sometimes to help with things like missions, I think we could also, in an innovative and creative way, begin to tap into the possibility that maybe some churches that currently have residents might be willing to share them, with you. And because here's the reality, if we're sending out residents into a denomination that is largely rural, and many of our churches that we've been referring to are mostly suburban and large, and our churches are mostly rural and small, it would make sense for some of our larger churches to allow our smaller rural churches to have access to some of the residents, because they would be trained also to go out into many of the churches that are part of our denomination. And so that's part of the innovation that we're trying to think through, and include other churches into some of that. But here's where I want to kind of end, because I think most of the questions that have been asked have been answered in the Q&A area. But I want to give our panelists just kind of a way of kind of closing out. So if you were to give, based on what you've heard, based on some of the questions that have been asked, if you were to say kind of some final thoughts to the viewers as we prepare to close out, if they're going to try to get residents, if they're going to try to start a residency program, if they're concerned about being small and not knowing if they can do this, if they want to diversify their staff, like what are some of the things that you would say, just kind of as going away, just about a minute, just to make sure we can include everyone? What would you say to those watching?
I'll jump in. I think that it's a huge matter of taking account what you have to offer to an up and coming pastor. And so that's going to be a different inventory for every church. But there are some churches that when you may have a desire to be a part of raising up the next generation of pastors for the church, but the season your church is in just isn't right for this. And that's okay. The important thing is that you've taken an inventory and asked yourself, what does my church uniquely and distinctly have to offer in this realm of pastors that we're training for the future? And the church looks different from neighborhood to neighborhood. And so the beautiful thing about this is that there are endless models, endless ways that this could make a contribution. So take inventory of what you have, and then how free you're feeling with sharing that right now, because taking on a residency is not always easy. It requires something of you and your church for sure, even though there are great blessings that come from it as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in next. One of the things, I guess one of the words that comes to mind that I said before, be intentional with anything that you do. Be intentional. You yourself, maybe as a church, as someone that might be interested in having residents or having the residency program, you yourself know what you need. Do not try to pick up a resident just to have a resident. Be intentional in the questions that you ask. Be intentional in the information as far as what you need as a church that you give out. So just intentionality. I would say don't be afraid to test waters, but just you yourself should know what you need as a church. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I'm gonna jump in and say, if I look back at my time, a lot of the context we've been bringing up, I spent time at the Edge in Grand Rapids, which is very urban, and I would never take that back for a moment. It was equipped me for so much that I am seeing now in my church that's small town. But some of my first internships and residency times were in tiny churches that saw something and gave me a chance. So if you are sitting here and you're listening and you're just like, man, I really want to do this, like, make sure your congregation is on board. There's probably nothing more frightening than coming into a church as an intern and feeling unwelcomed because not everybody's on board. That can really make you question a lot of things. Like, is there something wrong with me as a person? So make sure your congregation's on board. 2, think outside the box. We've talked about that a lot. Like, you don't have to get a resident or an intern from a Wesleyan school. A lot of my friends have stumbled upon, just like Colby, their residency. So look within your church. Are you having conversations with the people in your church? Is God stirring someone's heart and they're just really not sure? Like, I have 3 kids, but I feel this call to ministry, but I can't do that. Like, are you having those conversations within your church? And then if you are going to look outside to a Wesleyan school or a seminary for a resident or an intern, just be open to maybe something outside the box. But also make sure that you're talking to people in your congregation and your board and whoever you're looking to make that decision, that you make the decision together and you're saying, like, this is really what we need. This is really what we're after. Here is a way we'd really like to grow. And that will definitely guide who you're looking for and who you're going to pull in. Ultimately, if you're sitting and listening and you're just like, man, I don't think I can make this happen. If God is calling you to it, it's going to happen. God always aligns things, and who knows, somebody could visit your church, get plugged in, and 6 months from now be like, have a conversation with you and say, I feel called to ministry. You just never know. So keep your ears open and your heart open as well to what God has when you think outside the box and if you really want to bring someone in.
I would add that on top of everything that everyone has said, there are obviously different models that one can use. There are obviously different kind of structural things that can be implemented to pull off a residency program in different contexts. But I would add that the biggest gift to me as a resident has just been the knowledge, as Maggie was just talking about, is that sense of welcome, right? That I was being invited into a congregation that was going to walk with me throughout my time there, that there were going to be ups and downs. As a African American male in a predominantly white church, there were going to be some pretty big obstacles that I was going to face, but it was that sense that I wouldn't be walking the journey alone, and that is much more valuable than kind of some of the particularities around how the residency was rolled out. So if your passion is walking alongside and helping people who feel that they're called to ministry succeed, then I would say that is definitely something that you should continue to discern and see how you might be able to pull it off.
I would like to be able to add something just as a resident right now, and something that I've been seeing is that even if a resident does come on and in the end they end up, or halfway through it or at some point through it, they're like, you know what, I don't know if ministry is for me, to not feel defeated in that, because this program is all about leadership and leading and building up the leaders. And of course, God gives us all talents and gifts, but maybe a job or a career in the church isn't exactly what they want to do. But the thing is that you're still leading them and they are still growing in the areas that God has called them to, but maybe it is somewhere down the road in some other place. And so just to not feel defeated and just to reassure the resident that, you're not wrong, that it's okay to feel that maybe this residency program isn't for you, or that at some point maybe they start questioning it, just to reassure them that to really think and pray about it, because Satan is going to try and get in there, and if they fail, then they're going to start doubting themselves, or just to really be just intentional, as it's been said. So just don't feel defeated if a resident does at some point, after they've prayed about it, just decide that it's not for them. Just know that you have helped develop God's kingdom by helping to develop them.
Yeah, so let's just, I'm going to kind of close out, ask Josmar to pray for us, but just a reminder too that, residents sometimes, in the course of the residency, figure out that maybe the area they thought they felt called to or thought that they would be gifted in might be different than what they've realized once they get involved. And so the openness, you may bring in a person in youth ministry and they figure out, man, I feel better in spiritual formation, or you bring them in worship and they figure out, man, I feel called more to missions. And so, be open to the possibility of their evolution, and as well as the evolution of the church and their response. And so there definitely is a need for flexibility. Before Josmar prays, we are already at 1, and we're going to close out and try to honor your time. Just a reminder, we do continue this webinar series. Our next topic is homogeneous church transitions. That'll be a 2-week, 2-part series. The first will be next week. We typically meet at the same time, 11:30 a.m. on Mondays, Eastern Standard Time. And then we have several other topics that will follow: diversifying your staff, planting multi-ethnic, next-gen multi-ethnic ministries. And then we'll end by talking about how to have multi-ethnic conversations and the strategies to create that within your context. But Joseph, why don't you close us out in prayer, and as we prepare to kind of send people out.
Yes, let's bow our heads and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time that we have to share, to learn from these panelists. Thank you for everything that they have done, for everything that they have learned, for the ways that you have kept them, for encouraging them, for the pastors, for each church and each pastor that was also watching this webinar. Thank you so much for their desire, Lord, to be involved in this. Thank you for all the questions that they posed to. Just God, I just ask you that you be with these people that have a desire to have residents in their churches, Lord, and then they are trying to wrestle with the ideas of how do they do this, where do I start, where to look. So just, Lord, just be with them, talk to their hearts, and also talk to those people that would like to do these residencies, Lord. Just talk to them, speak to their hearts, Lord, and let them know not to be defeated, just that they are going to be placed in a church or in a ministry where you want them to be, Lord, for your glory, so they can fulfill everything that they are, Lord. And then just also help the pastors in each church to be intentional, to reach out, to make them feel welcome, Lord, and just help them through the difficulties, Father. You are in the midst of every conversation, and we give you glory, God, and we love you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for all of you who were viewing this. God bless you. Dios los bendiga. Have a great week.